everyone. Welcome to another episode of Her Own Words. Today I'm joined by Susanna Ross Clyde, an aspiring writer with Southern roots, a love for sweet tea, and a touch of sass inherited from her grandmother. A storyteller since childhood and former Venue magazine writer, Susanna uses her blog, Tacos and Truth Bombs, as a space for reflection and therapy. When she's not busy providing for her two kids, or hanging out with her rescue dog, you'll find her in a hot yoga class or enjoying a glass of wine with friends. Thanks for being here, Susanna.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to talk to you today, talk more about your essay, learn more about your experience navigating divorce, and just learn more about you, the person behind the essay. But first, I wanted to start by asking you about your writing experience and how that journey has looked like for you, what role, if any, it's played in helping you navigate life experiences or just process things throughout life.
Great. So I consider myself a storyteller since I was probably in first grade. I remember my first grade teacher, whose name was Mrs. Bat, of all things, said, "Oh, you have such a creative mind. You're really come up with these really fun stories." And I think it launched my interest in writing. And then over the years, I've played around with it in various capacities, from a traditional business style writing, press releases, to something more fun like my blog, to even ad copy. And I think for me, writing is a form of therapy. It's when I feel stressed, sometimes I just need to vomit up the mouth and put pen to paper and get it all out. And I feel an instant sense of relief, like I'm letting go literally onto paper or onto the computer screen what I'm harboring. And I find that it's a relief for me. I'm terrible with numbers. I am the first to admit math was not my forte, but I've always been decent with words and enjoy it.
That's awesome. Do you find it easy to free write and process everything on paper, or do you ever face issues of perfectionism? Because sometimes I go through that where I'm like, oh, it's not the right word, and it can keep you from processing or really just letting it go. Have you mastered that, or do you still struggle with that in your writing?
I don't think we will ever master it, if we're being honest with ourselves. I probably read this essay 25 times and changed it, a word here, a word there. But I think, like any form of art, there really is no such thing as perfection, right? My daughter's a visual artist and she has a similar mindset. Oh, you could tweak this. I'm not happy with that. Writing and art, they are subjective and they can evolve over time. And I don't think perfection is necessarily the goal. I think expression is the goal.
I love that. That's a great way to look at it. I'm going to have to remember that myself when I'm writing. But that's beautiful. And right, it is subjective. And I do find writing to be a form of art, and, storytelling can happen in so many ways. So I need to put that in the back of my head. I'm going to channel you when I'm writing next time.
I don't know that I'm always successful with it.
But it's true. It's just a process of continuing to try and write, express yourself, and see where it goes. And
Absolutely.
that's something we forget. Do you find that storytelling, whether it's through your blog or I know that you've done improv acting, if that's given you more of a sense of control over your narrative, maybe helped you in moments where you've been missing something or facing challenges?
For sure. I would be disingenuous if I said that it didn't give me an opportunity to control my own narrative. And for years, I struggled with feeling like I had a voice, or wanting to hide my voice, or feeling like that my voice wasn't worthy or powerful enough. And letting go of that feeling and being able to write or act in an improv skit or present at work gives me a voice and gives me an inner strength that sometimes I need that. I need that.
Yeah, that's great. I tried improv very briefly. It's very nerve-wracking to come up with things on the spot, but I do love the concept of yes and.
Same. I'm so glad you know that.
Yeah, I feel like that's the only thing that stuck with me. We need more of that just in life, to be open to two things coexisting. But yeah, I find people who do improv very talented to be able to come up with witty things or come up with extensions of other people's comments. It's tough.
Well, I like the collaborative nature of it. I wish I could do more of it again, but life just got busy. So eventually I'll get back into it. But one of the other pieces I learned that I think lends itself to life is this concept of truth bombs and being able to drop a truth bomb, meaning a newsworthy moment or a secret that you've held on to or storyline, and emotionally react to it with your colleagues, with your friends, with your family. Truth bombs are a pivotal time in a storyline. And I have held on to that and the yes and theory.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't heard of the truth bomb. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
It must be interesting to process something like a climax moment with other people and figure out how you all react to it. That's cool.
What is going to happen once you drop the truth bomb?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's all these different forms of expression and art.
It is.
They're very cool. Getting into your essay a little bit, first of all, I think it's incredibly brave of you to be able to write about this experience. And as we were doing the reading earlier, I was thinking so often something happens to me and I want to write about it right away, but you've had a good amount of years to have perspective on it. So I'm curious what inspired you to write about this experience so long after it happened, or if you had started writing it 2013 and then if it's evolved over time. But I want to know more about that and why you felt it was important to even share this story.
Sure. So first I will say, in the mode of expressionism and perfectionism, I have started writing a book probably 8 different times over the last 10 years. And I've written chapters and then tossed it and not been happy with it. And I think the reason that I feel like now I am comfortable enough with the storyline is that I was still in the thick of post-divorce acceptance, post-divorce trauma, post-divorce court while trying to write it. It's like trying to teach yourself to drive while being behind the wheel. You're never going to be able to stay in the right lane. You're never going to successfully reach your destination. What has happened now is that watching my kids get to a point of peace has given me the strength I need to also get to a point of peace and be able to separate myself from the trauma. Whereas living inside the trauma while trying to write was just a bad idea. It was just a really bad idea.
Yeah, that sounds like a heavy experience. It's funny. I had something recently and I told a friend, I felt like Santa Claus just carrying a bag of, instead of gifts, just trauma, lugging it around.
Yeah.
And it's heavy. So it makes sense that it would impact your ability to write. And so to be able to kind of put it down and say, okay, I can drop this concern and free your mind a little bit to then be able to write more about it. Plus, now you have all this time and perspective. In your essay, you bring us from when it initially happened to finding reconciliation and forming a bond with your daughter's best friend. So it actually probably helped your story to take some time and have all these experiences along the way.
I think it did. And, hindsight's 2020, as they say, right? And I am much more clear-headed now. I am calmer. I am less emotional and reactionary to it. And I'm stronger. So it's time. It's time.
That's amazing. What was the key for you to be able to find strength in these really difficult moments? You also mentioned resilience in your essay. And so I'm curious what it means to you now to be resilient after this really tough experience that went on for some time. So what does strength and resilience mean to you now? And do you wear those words with pride? Because it can be hard when you're going through the thick of it. You don't really even want to have anything to be resilient about.
Well, it's funny you say it can be hard and you don't want to have to deal with it. People used to say to me, "You're so strong. I admire your strength. I don't know how you do it." And year after year, I would be like, "I'm so tired. I'm tired of being strong. Can I just be calm? Can I just be normal?" But what is normal? None of us are normal. And my story is not an anomaly. There are millions of women who deal with ugly divorces. There are millions of women and men who have to face affairs. And when I say resilience is a muscle built the hard way, I think it is a muscle. Just like when we work out, it's not easy. No one wants to go to the gym and exercise, but we have to be intentional with that muscle, and it doesn't just happen. Had curled up and buried myself in the couch for the last 10 years and not dealt with the hard stuff through faith and through friendships and through family and through exercise, I wouldn't have built that muscle. So am I proud of that? Yes. Is it always evolving? Absolutely. Because there are some times when I'm still a a messy puddle of nonsense. But I do think the combination of intentional effort to build that muscle has helped along.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way, the muscle. It's a good visual to think about, but it's true. You have to work on it over time. Some days you're more resilient than others, so that makes sense. And yeah, I can understand the wanting to just go like, I don't want to be resilient today. Like,
It's,
no, I'm sick of it.
I'm sick of it.
Yeah, I've had moments like that where I'm like, it must be so nice to just not worry about anything one day, not deal with
Right.
stuff. But, that's not the cards that were dealt.
It's not the cards that many of us are dealt. And, if it's not this, it's something else. And my story isn't necessarily more difficult or more challenging, but we all have to live with intentional awareness. I think I've tried really, really hard to invest in things that make me stronger.
Yeah. I also found that people who have had to deal with difficult things or, develop this resilience, end up being more empathetic to other people's situations. Everyone's going through something. And you've mentioned in your essays, faking it by day, and falling apart at night. So you have this experience of knowing people aren't always what they seem. They might be smiling and struggling in their own private moments. So it really makes you more empathetic to other people's situations. I think it's a beautiful thing. Speaking of the situation that brought about you having to be strong and resilient, everything started with your neighbor's husband calling you and letting you know. And it took you some time to really process everything and figure out, okay, I'm ready to leave. What was the most challenging part of that journey for you and coming to terms with the fact that you had to go, that you could no longer stay in this situation despite, what you wanted to believe or hoped wasn't real? Kind of what did that look like for you?
Well, I'll be honest and confess something. During that phase of my life, I think something took over me. It was almost a monster. I wasn't sleeping well. I was staying with friends and I'm going to shamelessly admit that I would drive by and see her car there and know that they were doing things with our children. It would eat me up inside. It would eat me up inside to know that she was there in my house, living my life with my children. And I did not behave the best at all times during those few months. But I think that moment of my daughter in the bathtub was pivotal because I was able to separate myself from my hurt to her hurt. I was able to differentiate between the anger and the madness that I was feeling about the situation and transfer to, wait a minute, how is this impacting my daughter? And what must she be feeling? And that's that empathetic transition that I think gave me the strength to go, okay, I have to do something different. I don't know what different looks like, and I'll figure it out later, but this is not me. I'm not happy with the way I am behaving. The bitterness and the anger is eating me up inside. I'm physically ill. And wait a minute. How is this impacting my daughter and how will it impact my son? And that is, for me, a transformational moment.
Yeah. Wow. Sometimes when we're in the thick of it and we are behaving in ways that are not us, it's so easy to forget that the right person would not make you feel that way, to have sleepless nights, to feel like you're acting crazy or bitter. And then there are a lot of people, men and women, who will stay in relationships because of their children. But the reality is that by leaving, you've set this great example of how your daughter should be treated, how your son should treat his partner later. And that's actually better for them in the long run, I believe, than seeing their parents in this dynamic where you're not happy. It is such a brave thing, but it's hard. It's hard to walk away.
It is really, really hard. I mean, my parents have been married 50 years this month. We're celebrating their 50th anniversary. My sister is married to an amazing man, and I grew up in a Norman Rockwell storyline, and I wanted the same for my family. This was not what I thought my life would look like, and I was fighting the truth tooth and nail. But sometimes I think our kids give us a perspective that we don't know we necessarily need with their honesty.
Yeah. And kids are so honest and uninhibited. I don't know where along the way we become so afraid and lose that confidence, but it's amazing. It's good for us as adults to be like, oh yeah, like that's an interesting way to look at the world, and probably makes you step back too and say like, yeah, that's not how I want to be acting.
Exactly. It's not how I want to be acting. And no, it's not normal. This is not normal. And I'm not going to accept the abnormal.
Yeah. Along those lines, I'm curious whether it's from your community or the culture you grew up in, the societal pressure and the norm of what was around you, how much that influenced you hesitating about leaving and feeling like you were not only going to break up your family, but you were also going to at the same time break down this illusion that you had created, with family photos and, posts, it's like this ideal life that everyone might have thought you had. How much did that play into your fear of leaving, if it did at all?
It absolutely did. And I would be lying if I said that it didn't play a role in staying longer than I should have in general. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky. I lived in a perfect neighborhood where every house was well manicured. Everybody's parents were together. My parents are the most amazing people and they're still madly in love. My grandparents were still together, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on and on. And I've always dreamt of being able to build a life similar to the one I was raised in because it was a gift. And I experienced as a child a true gift. I was truly blessed, and I know not everyone is, and I'm grateful for that. So I was damned and determined to try to bring that same storybook life to reality for us. And certainly social media plays a role. Certainly being in a small town where everyone knows each other and we still live in a small community, it all plays a role. And you sort of walk around with a scarlet letter, right? And I also would be remiss if I didn't say I was envious of the perfection that everyone appeared to have. And I wanted it to be true for me too. So I had to let go of that idea of what looks like perfection and accept reality for what it is. And now, years later, I'm still in the same community, different house. We made it our own. It looks different. My kids split holidays between homes. They have 2 birthdays and 2 Christmases, and it is not at all what I would have wanted. But I think in some weird way, it's what I needed because I have become what I didn't know that I could be and what I wouldn't have been had I stayed.
Yeah. As you say that, it makes me think of friends that have made decisions to not breastfeed because they were so severely depressed that they didn't sleep. And they feel so guilty because they've made these decisions that are going to make them feel healthier and be able to actually take care of their kids better. But that's not what they're supposed to be doing, right? And I've found myself having to remind them, it's actually going to make you a better mother, but there's so much pressure put on women to do these things in this prescriptive manner. And if you deviate even the slightest bit, you're doing something wrong.
Right. And we live in a very public, and I will say shame-filled society. Everything is public. And if it's not right in line with the traditional norm, people are quick to judge, quick to react, and sometimes quick to shame. And I felt a lot of shame going through this, but now I'm like, whatever. I don't have anything to be ashamed of. I'm going to call a big whatever on that.
No. And, even having to step away from social media for the holidays because it's just an abundance of curated photos. But the truth is, you never know. I feel like we're constantly selling this ideal to each other and there's no space to be vulnerable. No one's going online and saying, I had a really bad day today. So all we see is how great everyone else is, how perfect they are, which isn't helping us feel ashamed and guilty about the things we're not doing or the decisions we've made. It's tough.
It is tough. And I will be the first to admit my house is generally a mess. My bank account is generally low. My bags are generally big, but it's all right. It's all right.
But you're doing things that make you happy, it sounds like, with the yoga and the writing and just being at peace internally. It sounds very different from how you were when you were in the thick of it.
For sure.
So speaking of realizing that it was time to go, but also balancing that with the pressures of what are people going to think? I'm curious how your perspective has changed in terms of friendships and trust? Were there people in your life that you thought were going to shame you for certain things that ended up being supportive, or vice versa? Because you speak of finding support from other people, and it's sometimes in those hard moments that you realize who is actually on your side and who's going to be there. How did that whole experience help you realize like who you could trust and what trust meant for you?
Trust is a huge word for me for obvious reasons. Betrayal is a huge word for me. And I tend to, generally speaking, trust easily. Or I used to at least, trust very, very easily. I am a Taurus. I'm very loyal. I am very dedicated to my friends and my family, and I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve. So after this experience and others like it, I put up a bit of a wall. And certainly I can count 3 or 4 friends who really, truly non-judgmental, sleep in my bed, we don't care, hang out with me and my husband, you're cool friends. And then my family. And I will tell you, my biggest fear making that decision in May of 2013 was, how am I going to disappoint my family? Because they didn't even know the complete detail of everything. Since they had some ideas, but I never wanted to disappoint them. So I packed up the kids, we drove to Kentucky, and I showed up at their house without a single plan, a place to live, a separate account full of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a big old story to tell. Terrified. But my family embraced it and said, well, we're not really surprised, to be honest with you. And we've got you. And my family still has me. Those 3 or 4 friends that I can count on still have me. And there have been times over the years when I have completely fallen apart, had a little bit of a mental moment, had an outer body experience. And those people have shown up, sat with me, and reminded me that this is not the end of the story. This is a moment in the story. So is it a little harder to trust these days? Absolutely it is. Absolutely. But I will say time has given me the ability to see people for who they really are.
That's amazing. And such an important message about sometimes we're so worried about disappointing people. And then we show up with our mess or truth, and it doesn't disappoint them at all. It's almost like this pressure we put on ourselves. And then it's interesting that they weren't surprised, but yet they were still there when you were living this Norman Rockwell painting. I think that's so important, to be there for people and support them. Even if we don't necessarily agree with what they're doing in the moment, people have to come to their own decisions on their own. You had to get to that point by yourself.
And no one would have told me otherwise. People did try to tell me otherwise, but I had to get to that point on my own. And that's kind of like anything in life, at least with me, is that I need to experience it, accept it, and deal with it on my own terms in my own time. That's the stubborn Taurus in me.
Yeah, but then you make the decision from you. I think it's easier for people to stick to those decisions than to be forced into them. You mentioned that you packed up your children and went. Did you tell your children in that moment the full extent of what was going on? Or have you had those conversations since?
For sure. That's difficult. So that particular moment, no, I didn't tell them anything. I just said, your dad's busy. We're going to go to my parents for my birthday and Mother's Day weekend. It's a little getaway. Try to keep it up on the up and up. Despite everything that had happened, I was still respecting his family, still respecting his position. And I knew that at the end of the day, he's still their dad. So it is not my position to throw him under the bus. Trust me, there were moments when it would have been great to do so, but he's still their dad. And the best thing I can do is heal and be the best version of myself for them when they're with me. And hopefully he can do the same.
Yeah, that's important. And that speaks a lot to your love as a mother, to try to still protect them and and not tarnish that relationship just because your relationship with their father is no longer a
Right.
romantic one.
I try to remind myself to always love them more than I hate him.
Yeah, that's a good one. And have you reached a place now where you can have friendly conversations, celebrate together? I know you mentioned there's two of everything happening now.
So no,
No, okay.
we are not that family. Again, going back to accepting reality. I have friends who have been through divorces and they are celebrating Christmas morning together and splitting the gifts, the cost. So every child just gets one, and birthdays together and graduation parties. Unfortunately, we're not that family. But I think what I have learned to do is accept that reality and give my kids the best possible experience I can on my terms in my home when they're with me or with my family. It's in no way ideal, and has it impacted them over the years? Absolutely. They're completely aware of the dynamic, and they're smart kids. They're very, very smart. So would I love for it to be different? Would they love for it to be different? Yes. But we don't have enough hours in the day to go through why it's not. All we can do is put up our own tree and have our own moments.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, you're doing the best you can with what you were given. It's not a situation you created, but now you're trying to make it work as best you can in a way that you can stay healthy and give your kids the best experience possible.
For sure. The three of us are really, really close as a result. So that's good.
Yeah, that's important. So we talked about off air, but I find Taylor Swift to be so fascinating. I don't love all of her songs, but I respect her as an artist and a businesswoman. It's just like one thing after the other. And hearing her in your essay, it just really speaks to how music and lyrics, they can really just touch us so deeply. And it's not just about a money-making business. It really is about art that can inspire us and move us. And so I wanted to hear more from you about how you felt hearing Taylor's lyrics and how they empowered you or got you through those moments where you aren't sleeping and you were navigating all of this. And she's still creating songs now. Are there new songs that really hit home for you?
For sure. I mean, I feel almost silly because I'm 47 years old and 90% of the music I listen to is Taylor Swift. And I am obsessed with her lyrics and her passion. Do I think that she's the most amazing artist on the planet? No, I'm not googly in that way. There are tons of amazing artists. What I am always impressed and inspired by is her ability to write these stories that feel as though women like me, and I'm not just going to say me, just me, women like me are living in that story. And it's passionate and it's deep and it's not surface level. The first time I heard this song, there's actually another bridge in the song that talks about he's got my past frozen behind glass, but I've got me.
I love that.
And yes, my past was frozen in some ways, mainly because we've dealt with challenges year over year over year still. So it is kind of frozen. But along the way, I've found me and I've got me and I'm okay with that. So yeah, the song in particular hits hard. But I mean, you know, The Smallest Man That Ever Lived, for obvious reasons, is a great one. Who's Afraid of Little Old Me is a great one. All Too Well is obviously the best. So yeah, there's a lot of really great ones.
Yeah. Are there other artists, books, or outlets that have also been meaningful to you, or that stand out?
Absolutely. I mean, they fall in secondary to Taylor, of course. But yes, going through this process, I enjoyed a lot of personal development books. And I became this personal development junkie. I've since released some of that, and now I'm back to fiction. But I love Brene Brown and her work. I took a courage class of hers, which was super fun. And she talked a lot in her books and in that class about filling your jar with people who fill you up and keeping that jar close. And then I love Glennon Doyle. And one of her phrases that stuck with me over the years is life can be brutal. It can be both brutal and beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for so many of us is brutal and challenging, and we are not without scars or pain, but it's also beautiful because there are so many celebratory moments that come with the end of the pain.
Yeah.
So I love those two. And, I've always been, from my country roots, a Chicks fan, and I've seen Mumford and Sons a few times. I love their music as well, Coldplay. And now I've recently gotten into Gracie Abrams because she is learning all things from Taylor, and I like her stuff as well.
That's awesome. I went to a Coldplay concert last September with my cousin, and it was one of the most amazing experiences
Aren't
ever.
they great?
It's
Oh,
just so cool. They're like the artists. I could see why people would go to every concert
yeah.
every time. It's just so amazing.
Oh, they're so good. And their song Fix You,
Oh, I love that song.
love that song, because I tend to be one who tries to fix other people, or I used to. I tried to fix him a number of times, and I tried to fix our post-divorce life, and you just can't.
No, and not at the expense of yourself. That's the hard part, which I don't want to speak for men, but I do find that women, sometimes we tend to, very easily fall into that role of, I'll fix this and I'll take that and I'll just take on burden after burden until there's nothing left for you. And that can't work.
I have a hard time letting someone else take care of me, because I've always felt the need to fix everything around me.
Yeah. What have you done to actively work on that? I mean, I have a hard time not being of service 24/7. That's what I tell people. It's so hard. Do you have any tricks that have worked to just say so?
No, but just find people around you who remind you that it's okay to take a step back sometimes. Just
Yeah.
the good people will do that and encourage that balance.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's so easy to fall into, if I'm of service, I'm helpful and it's a positive
Right.
thing, but you don't have to be. People appreciate you even if you're not doing anything for them, solving a problem. But it can be a hard one. And I've just, from conversations with other women in my life, it seems to be a pattern of,
Yes,
of all of us just trying to save the day, and it burns us out really quickly.
for sure. For sure.
Um, but what you were saying earlier about lyrics and artists, I think it's such a reminder of even this podcast, the essays, just the power of storytelling
Yes.
in a song, in a movie. It's so important for people, and sometimes I think we forget that there's all these little moments, and it might be the simplest thing, but it really can have an impact on somebody. And I've felt the same way about lyrics or movies, and something that always stays with me is there's that neat movie Collateral Beauty. There's a scene with Helen Mirren, but not to ruin the movie for you, but she's in this moment of grieving and speaking to someone else who's grieving, and she tells her, don't forget about the collateral beauty. And that just stays with me because it can be so easy to fall into all of these things are happening that are wrong, that are bad. And you look back and you're like, wow, there are actually these really great moments that happened. And just from talking to you in our brief conversation so far, it seems like you've really reinvented yourself and found things that fuel your soul. It sounds like you're in a much happier place with who you are and doing all the things that are happy for you versus what would have been good for other people, looked great on paper. It can be hard for women to live authentically in that way.
And I hope it's a lesson for my daughter that vulnerability and authentic living, just being true to yourself. I know it sounds cheesy, but being true to yourself is the easiest way to live. And at this point, it's the only way for me to live. This is it. This is what you get.
I love that though. That's amazing. I read something recently about how you can't fail at your own life. Makes sense, but it's so hard to remember that. You can only fail by trying to be someone else that you're not. So that's amazing. I know you didn't write about this in your piece, but you mentioned it in your submission. To the extent that you're comfortable, I wanted to ask you a little bit about being 1 in 5 women that survive domestic violence. If there's anything you can share about that. And I guess also, what role did that play in you leaving, or was it more the infidelity that really pushed you to go?
Whew. Yeah, that's a heavy one, because it wasn't just one experience of one thing. It wasn't just one night that said, okay, now I'm done. Because going back to me being a fixer and a people pleaser, for years I felt like, well, if I made the perfect casserole, then he's going to love it and we're not going to get in a fight. He's not going to throw things. And if I sent us to therapy, if we went to church, if we read this book, if we did all these things, because I was trying to fix something that was truly impossible to fix. And I think that abuse is an ugly word. It's an ugly word. It comes in many, many forms. There's verbal, emotional, silent treatment, physical moments. Infidelity is a form of abuse to your marriage. It's a scar. All these are little scars. It takes so many years to heal from all those scars. Yeah. So many years. And there are moments when the wounds open up just a little bit. So it wasn't one thing. It was all the things. And it wasn't until I realized the impact it was having on the kids, what my daughter saw, and what she heard is hard for her to accept even now. And several years ago, she said, Mom, I blocked that part of my life out. There's a period of time for her that she has no memories whatsoever. Because it's a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. So when all those scars and all those experiences start to build up and you realize they're also scarring your child, it goes back to my love for them is stronger than my hate for him. So am I still a work in progress on that part? Absolutely. Because sometimes a little moment can open up the wound again, but it's a lot better. And I know that my story is, again, not unique. I think what sometimes is unique and what I hope others realize is that I had a support network. I had friends and family. I had people to hold my hand and remind me that it was going to be okay. Not every woman has that. So I think some women stay trapped in this cyclical effort to fix things, even at the expense of their kids, because they don't have a support network. I'm blessed and grateful to have had a soft place to land.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. And I think it's coping mechanism, block it out and keep going. So it makes sense. And I think kids are so resilient. You can really train your brain to just self-heal in whatever way you need. But it's good that you're able to have those conversations with her, even to know that that's, something she still struggled with versus keeping it inside.
Exactly. And she and I both went through our own experiences of healing. She's really great now. I'm really great now, but it was a journey for both of us.
Yeah. Speaking of that journey, I wanted to ask how you built your sense of self after this, and what was it like to rediscover the things that you enjoyed? I know you mentioned in your essay some mission trips, traveling, and even being a mom's club. How was that process of testing different things out, seeing what you liked, trying things that were new, or going back to things you liked before? How was this process of reinvention after such a difficult time?
So it definitely didn't start off in an easy, automatic way. It wasn't like, oh, I left one day and then the next day I said, I'm going to go on a mission trip, or I'm going to start taking improv classes. There was definitely a period of, I'm just going to lay on the floor and cry. There was definitely a period of that. But I think going back to the brutal, that something can be beautiful and brutal. Yes, it's brutal. But if I could separate myself from the brutal and realize that I have this newfound opportunity to rediscover my voice, to rediscover what interests me, I have time. Selfishly, I have time now. When I separated myself from the brutal, it was a blank canvas. And once I took one step, then another step and another step, and I started meeting people who opened my eyes and my ears to new perspectives that I would never have met if I had been stuck in a loveless marriage. So I took my first mission trip with actually my sister and brother-in-law, and we went to the Dominican Republic. And in the middle of July, by the way, which was a terrible terrible time to go. But we built a medical facility. I was on the roof tying rebar by hand for 8 hours a day in the middle of July. And that perspective of realizing, yeah, what I'm going through, it pretty much sucks. There's no way of ifs, ands, or buts about it. But I'm not hand tying rebar in an impoverished community in the Dominican. And I still have so many blessings. And taking that risk led to another risk and another risk. The people that I have met in the last 10 years, the cultures and the experiences that I've been exposed to because of my divorce have helped me regain my sense of self.
Wow, that's amazing. I always find that the hardest part is just starting something. How did you get yourself to say, okay, I'm going to take these risks and experiments? How did you get yourself to keep trying them?
Are you familiar with the Enneagram? Okay. So I'm a 7. So I have an adventuresome spirit anyway. And at this point, when my life was in shambles, what's the worst that could go wrong, right? I mean, there are some things I'm not going to do. I'm not going to jump out of an airplane because I have a terrible fear of heights. That's never going to happen. But opening myself up to new cultures and opportunities and connections, what's the worst that could happen? And I have another story, right? And I've built so many chapters in my life that now it almost feels like an interwoven Netflix movie that got me to a happy ending.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned earlier how, you had this community. It was easier for you, although not easy, to move forward and have support. What advice would you give to other people that are navigating other similar challenges, whether they have community or not, and they're finding it hard to let go? What would you say that might help them feel more confident in that decision of moving forward and leaving something that might not be serving them?
I would say sharing your truth is okay. Even if the truth is ugly, sharing your truth is okay. And it's that whole going back to the serenity prayer, accept the things you cannot change and change the things you can. By sharing your truth with just one person, even just one person, that is the first step toward acceptance. And the other side, it's scary and it's unknown. And trust me, I'm a planner. I like to have everything planned out. I like to know what the end of the book is going to look like. But trust me when I say that by sharing your truth, accepting that reality, taking that first step, the end of the book looks so much better than the current chapter.
That's beautiful. I love that. Speaking of acceptance, it brought me back to your piece where you said you're at the graduation and you realize now it's time to let go. And that segues into acceptance and forgiveness. How did that conversation come about? I mean, I think it takes a lot of bravery from both of you to even be able to have that conversation. Because it seems like this young woman has stayed in your daughter's life. And so you've both been through it on different ends of things. What do you think made that moment possible for you to have that conversation and be able to accept and let go together?
I think between all three of us, time for sure. I think we've all had to accept our own realities in our own way. And we've all had different experiences, yet we're connected by a trauma that changed 2 households, right? And I have never, ever blamed her children or my children for anything that happened. They were collateral damage and a situation that they had no choice or part in, and it really impacted them. But I've always tried to teach my daughter, too, that you love someone through the pain.
Yeah.
And I love those girls, and I'm proud of where they are now and what they've had to go through to get to where they are now. Yeah. And she's like a second daughter. It's not her fault, not my daughter's fault, not my son's fault, not her sister's fault. It's not their fault. And I'm not here to place blame or judgment or shame. I'm here to create a safe space because I know what she's going through. I know what she's been through. I can relate.
Yeah.
And, I once heard a phrase, you can be bitter or you can be better. We could have been bitter. We could have spent our life being bitter. And I've had my moments, but I'd rather be better and love each other through even the painful times.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was like, wow, it's really impressive that they kept their friendship going, knowing that both of their parents played this role in creating the
Mhm.
situation. So I think all of you were very mature about the situation. But I think it's great that you were able to have that conversation so many years later and feel like, okay, you can have some closure.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you have to just forgive what you can't forget. It doesn't mean we've forgotten everything,
Yeah.
but when you can forgive, even when you can't forget the pain, you're not walking around with this weight on your back, right? Or harboring this resentment that will eat you up inside.
Yeah.
That's not fair to anyone.
No. And it makes you sick in the long run, I think. You hold the grudge and it doesn't do anything to the other person. You're the one who ends up getting sick and feeling crappy, and they're fine.
I mean, they're living their best life, and you're over here battling every autoimmune disease known to man, you know? So sometimes you just have to forgive, let it go. Doesn't mean you're forgetting it. Doesn't mean you're saying it's right, but move on.
Yeah, it's important. And your essay ends on a very hopeful note about forgiveness and moving on and as we've talked in our conversation, there is a light at the end of a very difficult chapter. And I like the idea that it's not the end of your book, it's just the end of a chapter. So I think along those lines, what do you hope that listeners will take away from your piece and this conversation?
I hope that listeners, women, young girls, whoever is experiencing a similar type of pain realizes that, this is going to sound cheesy, but truly the sun does come out tomorrow. Truly, darkest at night finds its way to a sunny day eventually. So I will just say, look for the moments of light that will keep you going and keep you moving forward. Looking back on the past 11 years, there have been so many moments of light. Mission trips, encouraging my children to try new sports, decorating our Christmas tree together, doing Christmas karaoke and on the porch. These are all moments of light. So hold on to the moments of light that will truly propel you.
That's awesome. That's great. I love that. I love holding on to the moments of light. And it's nice that you have some memories that you can pinpoint to that hopefully overshadow all of the hard ones. Something that I like to ask everyone to end our conversation in an effort to keep growing the Her Own Words community is if there's one piece of advice that you would give your younger self, or even just to another woman, what would that be?
That whole to thine own self be true. I used to, growing up, try to pretend to be a Sarah or Jenny or Whitney or a perfect Norman Rockwell family later in life. But to thine own self be true will give you the peace that comes with the passage of time.
Yeah, that's great. It's hard, but it's so important to be authentically you, uniquely you, and it doesn't matter if it looks different from what other people are doing. That's probably the better thing. Well, I just want to say thank you for sharing this very vulnerable piece. From talking to you and reading your piece, it was a very tumultuous time in your life. And the fact that you were able to write it down in a coherent way that's engaging, I'm always just so amazed by people's writing ability to be able to put it in a way that other people will understand and will be brought along the journey with you is really powerful. So I want to thank you for taking the time today. It's been so nice chatting with you, and I appreciate your bravery to talk about some of the difficult moments and share the happy ones. I know that there's a lot of good advice that you shared in this conversation that hopefully will resonate with other people and make them feel more empowered to live authentically and to hopefully leave bad situations that aren't serving them, feel confident that they're going to land on their feet. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. You made it so comfortable, and I really admire the work you're doing and want to encourage you to continue to share other women's stories because we pretty much rock.
Thank you. I love that.